This is the Eve of Eid as is being observed in London on Friday. So this is Thursday evening and this is 18:38 GMT in London on Thursday the 30th of July 2020. So we're going to do a note and read some extracts from the poetry of Qazi Nazrul, who is currently the national poet of Bangladesh, but he is more than the national poet of Bangladesh because he is observed, celebrated, and remembered and studied and discussed and followed and revered beyond a particular country. So internationally, and the more people know about Nazrul Islam's poetry, the better is the awareness of humanity. So this poem that I'm going to start reading is, of course, the most well-known of his poems, and it is the poem that he is known as the eponymous, the Bidruhi, the rebel. And I'm one of the people who have translated into English Nazrul's Bidruhi, the rebel. And this is the occasion to reiterate invitation to anyone who has translated the Bidruhi into English, because that is where I have actually done the translating into. I would welcome submissions of the versions that have been translated into English, because I want to then go on to publish a compilation of the best versions into English of Nazrul's poetry, starting with The Rebel. So this is the poem in his original Bangla language, and it is something that I have done for many, many years. I have read this many times since I was introduced to this poem. And I'm going to start one version today, and it is 1841 GMT on Thursday, the 30th of July 2020. So I'll do this one version. There are various ways to do it. The starting is dependent on the mood and the time and the person doing the reciting and the reading. So either it's bolo or bol. So I shall say bolo. Bolo bir, bolo unnoto mamo shir. Shir nehari amari. Noto shir oi shikor himadrir. Bolo bir, bolo মহাবিশ্বের মহাকাশ ফাড়ি চন্দ্র সূর্য গ্রহতারা ছাড়ি ভোলক দোলক গোলক ভেদিয়া খোদার আসন আরশ ছেদিয়া উঠিয়াছি চির বিস্ময় আমি বিশ্ববিধাত্রীর মম ললাটে রুদ্র ভগবান জ্বলে রাজ রাজটিকা দীপ্ত জয়শ্রীর বলবীর আমি চির উন্নতশীর আমি চিরদুর্দম দুর্বিনীত নৃশংস মহাপ্রলয়ের আমি নটরাজ আমি সাইক্লোন আমি ধ্বংস আমি মহাভয় আমি অভিশাপ পৃথিবীর আমি দুর্বার আমি ভেঙে করি সব চুরমার আমি অনিয়ম উচ্ছৃঙ্খল আমি দলে যাই যত বন্ধন যত নিয়ম কানুন শৃঙ্খল আমি মানি না কোনো আইন আমি ভরাতরি করি ভরাডুবি আমি টর্পেডো আমি ভীম ভাসমান মাইন আমি দুর্জটি আমি এলোকেশে জোড় অকাল বৈশাখীর. This is the first page that I can access at the same time as doing the reading before the camera, and it has got another four lengths of another four parts, I think, in the same length. The poem is significant in many ways. First of all, it was written in about 99 years ago, I think, or about 100 years ago. And at a time, the country where he was living was occupied by empire, and the administration, the culture, the dominant authority figures, the establishment, all of these were British. And Nazrul Islam was not considered as anywhere near as important or significant by the colonialists, imperialists, the Raj authorities, who proved their disdain and dislike of him later by imprisoning him, putting him in prison. And we shall be talking about Nazrul's poetry against prison and against subjugation and against empire. But today I'm doing these introductory readings from Nazrul on the occasion of the Eve of the Eid al-Adha, because the Eid is supposed to be, in my view, a message to be practiced, spread across the community throughout the year, not just on the day or the week of the Eid. And my experience has been that the message of Eid, which is exaggerated by the participants, most of the participants during the day, the message of the Eid is not practiced enough, even during the day. And I refer to the tendency in the communities, not every single one, but the overwhelming majority of the Muslims observing Eid, either Eid al-Adha or Eid al-Fitr at the end of the month of Ramadan. The overwhelming majority do not appear to understand the gravity, the seriousness of the message of Eid. And that message is to be selfless, to be greedless, to get out of greed, selfishness, and the envy and the spite and the hostility and the intolerance of your neighbors or your fellow Muslims or your neighbors who may or may not be Muslim. And the message is lost or forgotten or denied. I have written many, many poems, and it is not accessible at this minute, and I shall come to that in later editions, why it is not accessible at this minute. One of the poems I have written many times, and I'm still processing the actual statement that I want to make in that poem. It is the title I have given in the last 30 years I've been writing it. I have not formally published it. And it is, title is The Anger of Eid. I have said anger of Eid, I've said it in London 30 years. So anger of Eid is because the preoccupation of the entire collection of people, mostly gathered in families, the orientation, the interest and the concentration, the focus is to enjoy and to consume and to show off. And I think that all of these are contrary to the spirit and the message and the lesson of Eid. And Nazrul Islam wrote a number of poems, not just called Eid, but other topics and themes. But those themes and topics cover the message of Eid. Eid is, in cultural, in a religious, festival-wise kind of reference framework, the two Eids are probably the nearest kind of communal expressions of what should be the message to humanity for equality, for justice, and for respect for others. Respect meaning that their needs, for basic material needs, are to be treated as being as important, if not as more important than our own. Once that is done, once that is practiced, the message of Eid becomes real. Otherwise, it remains artificial, and it remains, in fact, a denial of the message of Eid. So I say that on the Eid as it is in London most of the time, most of the people that I have spoken to are doing this formal starting of Eid tomorrow, but I'm starting it in the evening, the night before the Eid. And the poetry of Nazrul Islam in the Bangladeshi linguistic frameworks is it is a unique message, because in the rest of the culture, in the rest of the poetry that is allowed platforms in Bangladesh or in the counterpart linguistic parts in West Bengal or in other parts where the Bangla language is known and understood, the contemporary cultural literary message based on or around poems and poetry is not the same as that which was being attempted and given by Qazi Nazrul Islam. I'll come to that again in detail in later parts. But currently, today, I have to say that the Nazrul Islam poetry it remains unique. It is unique, and I have studied the various other languages and poems and contributions in other languages in the world. And the messages are obviously significant relating to the context of the poet's writings. But the collective contribution, the message to humanity that comes across in most of Nazrul's poetry is very, very important and unique. And I'm going to publish a number of those commentary and comments and contributions and messages, both online and on video, of course, and in print. And the reason is nobody has done the basic service to the cause of Nazrul's message, which is unique and remains absolutely as important today, in fact, more important today than it ever was for humanity. I knew Nazrul's best friend and Sufi Zulfikar Haidar. Now, Sufi Zulfikar Haidar and I met only one day, once, and it happened in January 1970. It was the time of the flood, and we were returning from a trip to help the people, flood-affected people in the neighborhood of Dhaka city. And we traveled there, but I didn't speak to him. We were in a boat, but I didn't sit next to him or near him, so I didn't get to speak to him. Once he left the boat on our return, he introduced himself as Sufi Zulfikar Haidar and as one of the closest friends of Nazrul Islam. And in the 1 hour or 2 hours that we spoke, I don't think it's more than 2 hours, if that, we spoke in January 1970. Sufi Zulfikar Haidar told me more than anyone else had said in any book or any article or anything else. And the message that Sufi Zulfikar Haidar told me, I shall expand on it, explain it, clarify it, emphasize it, and I shall pay tribute to Sufi Zulfikar Haidar as well for his compassionate attitude and his sense of outrage that Nazrul Islam in his lifetime, in his prime, was the subject of so much vicious, jealous sniping and propaganda by his rivals. No one was his rival. They could not be, but that is what he said they did, and they contributed in various clandestine, anonymous ways to pieces that are written against Nazrul Islam. So Sufi Zulfikar told me that. Now, many years later, in London, I found a book he had written, and I have currently lost contact with that book, but I can hopefully locate it somewhere, and I shall be sharing his thoughts and observations about Nazrul Islam now. Sufi Zulfikar Haidar was the only person that I met who knew Nazrul and was a friend, very close friend, and he had a lot of respect for the rebel poet. So Nazrul's rebel, the Bidruhi, which is known after continues. আমি বিদ্রোহী সুত বিশ্ববিদাত্রী বলবীর চির উন্নত মম শির আমি জঞ্চা আমি ঘূর্ণি আমি পথ সম্মুখে যাহা পাই যাই চূর্ণি আমি নিত্য পাগল ছন্দ আমি আপনার তালে নেচে যাই আমি মুক্ত জীবন আনন্দ